Chen Tong, author of Almost a Revolution. In the epilogue of your book, you write, "I believe the end of tyranny is near." How near?
Well, I think for me, for a lot of people, they think the movement in China is over. But by my definition, when we're talking about the pro-democracy movement in China, I see more fundamental. I see in a more fundamental way. I mean, the foundation for the last spring movement, the people's dissatisfaction, the decentralizing political and economic trend by the local government, central government reformers versus conservatives, and also, you know, the factionism in the army, radical intellectuals searching for the new possibility for China. All these factors, they were foundation for the last spring movement, and they were only deepened and strengthened by the massacre itself. So I think the potential is still there, and even stronger. And after the last spring movement, we have our underground movement as well as exile movement. So I think the movement still keep going, although we have a surface setback, and we paid a big price last spring.
Here's the cover of your book. Who is this?
The two students actually were standing on a bus during a demonstration. You know, one of them was my friend. What's his name? I don't want to give his name, but he's in Tsinghua University, one of the Beijing biggest university.
So he's still in China?
Yeah.
When did you leave China?
Last June, like a week after the massacre.
And where are you now?
I'm in Brandeis University in Boston area.
Studying what?
Studying biology and philosophy, and also my group Democracy of China Fund, also based in Boston.
Group?
My exile pro-democracy movement organization. It's called Democracy of China, based in Boston.
And what are you going to do when you graduate? And you are a senior?
I'm a senior, yeah. I'm applying graduate schools, started to move my academic interest to political science and international relations.
Can you go back to China?
Right now, I don't think so, no.
So do you plan to stay in the United States?
Yeah, I'm consider myself as exile. That's me. You know, I can't go back right now, but I will go back whenever it's possible.
Why did you decide to write a book?
Well, it's very complicated. When I escaped from China, I was traveling around all over the world to tell the people what's going on there, you know. And that's the time I find out it seems there are two Tiananmen Squares. One is the one I really experienced. You know, there are excitement, frustration, even infightings, which never leave the heart of a social revolution. Another is the one, you know, kind of created by the Western media. It's all, each piece of the second Tiananmen Square is all accurate, but as a whole, it's quite dramatic and isolated, kind of stick out from Chinese history. People know Tiananmen Square, God of democracy, student in front of tanks, but they don't know exactly where the movement came from. So they don't really know where it goes. So it seems for them, you know, China didn't make it, they were close, and the Eastern European made it. So that's the time I feel the urgency to write a book as an insider, not only of the 1989 movement, but as a young person grow up in China for such a distinguished decade, the so-called open door policy ever since the end of 1970s. How my generation grew up, and how this new generation with a totally new ideology shaped the new atmosphere in the society, and finally shaped and triggered the 1989 movement.
During the book, we get to know your mother and father and sister and grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Your father died recently.
Mm-hmm.
When did he die, and what was it of?
He passed away a month after I escaped from China, and he had the fatal disease, the blood cancer, but
leukemia.
Yeah, leukemia, and the partly reason he died so fast. The disease was found like end of May, and he died like 2 months later. Where he was too depressed in a lot of ways. Government put pressure on him, and he was a Communist Party member. All his life, he was trying to follow so-called party lines. You know, it's his whole life ideology. And the government asked him to be the spy of his own son, which also he trusts a lot. So it's this whole controversy in his life, you know, for a long time, especially during the 1989 movement. He was very depressed.
Your mother, how is she?
She's okay. She's still in Beijing and working in a very big factories, hospital, and she's a medical doctor.
She's a medical doctor?
Yeah.
Your sister?
My sister, as my father, same as my father and me, she graduated from Peking University. We're very proud of it, you know, of my family. And she was working in a government consulting company, but after my escape, government put pressures on her and took away her passport, and her work unit gave her a lot of hard time, and now she changed to a foreign company, worked for a foreign company in Beijing.
And your grandmother?
My grandmother, she's fine. She's 76 years old, and she brought me up, and she's still healthy, but the only thing is she really can see me in the near future, and I hope I can go back soon to see her.
Now this is a picture of your grandmother? The one on the top?
Yes, when I was very young. Like, that's the picture when I was 100 days, you know, after I was born.
You say early in the book that your grandmother at age 3 started to teach you important things. What kind of things did she teach you?
Yeah, like Chinese traditional literature, all the important works, like the three kingdoms, and the dreams about. It is several important traditional literature work.
One of the things you keep reading are references to world figures and some American figures that you seem to know about. And one of them was Rosa Parks.
Mm-hmm.
How did you know about Rosa Parks when you were growing up?
Not exactly Rosa Parks. Excuse me. It's we know more about Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Dr. King, and Franklin, you know, and as well as the important figures during the Second World War. It's really due to the so-called open door policy in China. Since the end of 1970s, the Deng Xiaoping, after the fall of Mao Zedong's dynasty, basically, Deng Xiaoping's government opened door of China to the world. And Western materialism, as well as Western ideas and influential thinkers and politicians, all kind of rush in China. And my generation is a generation grew up in this totally new atmosphere. Not only Western world stuff, but also Chinese intellectuals started to search their own view. At that time, there were scar literature, so-called new tide poetry, as well as pop music, which totally created new kind of culture, at least a pop culture. And we grew up, we started to think and grow up from this new atmosphere, the combination of the new Chinese liberal atmosphere combined with Western ideals and Western materialism. And we gradually have this new ideology, you know, I would say it's individualism, totally different from the other generations in China previously. And I believe individualism, in a way, in a psychological and cultural way, is a foundation for pluralism, eventually.
Now, if you were still in China, could you still read these books?
Right now, it's the control is very tight, but there's no way to just wipe out all the Western stuff, as well as, I mean, the Western ideals and a lot of new values have already combined with the native Chinese cultural development. So there's no way for the central government to wipe it out. So it's still possible, especially you're not in cities like Beijing or Shanghai, which control is very tight. If you're out of Beijing, it's quite free still.
Where did you learn your English?
In China and here, yeah. every Chinese university student learn like 2 years so-called common English education. That's a part of the open door policy, which have a great deal of influence on us, and we take a big advantage from that.
You live near Tiananmen Square.
Yeah, it's like a mile west from Tiananmen Square. The street my family house on the side of is called Eternal Peace Avenue, Chang'an Avenue, and Tiananmen Square is kind of in the middle of the Chang'an Avenue.
Explain the kind of living conditions that you had when you were growing up.
Well, it was really different from so-called American life. It's very crowded. It's in Beijing. A lot of families, 3 generations live in one room, and the materials it's lack of materials for people line up a long line to buy basic supplies, but it's different. It's very compared. The level of the living is much poorer than American life, but most of the time people are happy because it's this 10 years open door policy. People really feel the sense of growing. Their life is getting better and better.
How many rooms were there in your home?
It's 2 rooms, very small rooms, and my family built up another small room. When I grow up, I have my kind of half room, my own space.
Did your parents own that?
No, it's owned by the government. Yeah.
How do you get your lodging? I mean, in other words, were they assigned through the party?
Yeah, through work unit, party, and if you're high-rank officials, you get a lot of rooms. And if you're just normal clerks, workers, small businessmen, or low-rank officials, you get very crowded in your family.
At what stage in your life did you know that you were going to be an activist?
It's quite the idea, the kind of shaping period is ever since when I was very young. It's from my family was a very liberal family. They brought me up in a very liberal atmosphere, and I started to involve in the social activities. It's kind of anti-government activity, pro-democracy movement ever since when I was 17 years old in 1985.
Why were your parents liberal?
Well, they're intellectuals, so in China and in almost every country, they're always kind of pioneers, intellectuals, at least in a theoretical, spiritual aspect. And also, they are very concerned. They concern the social issue a lot, and they were very idealistic when they were young. And another reason is they graduated from Peking University, which is the political and academic leading place in China for decades, ever since 1919 May 4th movement. And so that's the liberal atmosphere I have. But there's always controversy, not only in particular my family, but all my parenthood, and even younger than their generation, but we call Cultural Revolution generation, like 10 years older than my generation. This fine balance to keep concerned and unconcerned of the social issue. Keep concerned mentally, intellectually, but keep away from the direct involvement because they suffered too much. Their generation sacrificed too much and didn't get anything out of it.
But both your parents were members of the Communist Party, weren't they?
My father was, not my mother, because my mother kind of has this bad family background because one of her brothers is in Taiwan. So there's no way for her to join in the party, although she really, for her whole life almost, committed to the Communist Party's, so-called Communist Party's line.
Has your mother or any of your sister been hurt at all because you're over here and the communists obviously know that you're involved? They'll read your book. You worried about that at all?
Well, like what I said, after I left China, they give my family some hard time. Fortunately, actually, I would say fortunately, my father passed away. If he's still alive, since he was working in government, he will get a very hard time. And my sister had to change her job from a Chinese company to a foreign company in Beijing, and they took away her passport. She couldn't travel abroad.
She was at one time going to go study in Japan.
Yeah.
Changed her mind. Or they changed it for her.
They changed it for her. They took away. Still, she's working in a Japanese company, and she couldn't go to Japan. Even the company wants her to go to Japan because they won't give her passport, the Chinese government.
2 of your grandparents committed suicide. Why?
This is not only the part of the suppression, the disaster the Communist Party created for 40 years now, but also involved in the Chinese old tradition, the matter of faith, lose faith, the grace. They were viewed, totally wrongly as so-called rich peasants, although they were very poor. My grandparents were in the countryside near Shanghai. Since they have argument with the new Communist Party leader in the village because they think they're corrupting. They were corrupting, and they are viewed as rich peasants. And during the Cultural Revolution, the Red Guard want to draw them to go on some kind of demonstration, criticize them, show them to the villagers, their friends. So right before the night they're about to go on the street, they committed suicide.
How many of people like yourself who were involved in the Tiananmen Square activities are here in the United States now?
There are students, about more than 10 of them, 20 around. But also there are intellectuals much older than us, older as 60 or 70 years old, also exiled from China. And our exile community is very big. As a student, in this country, there are 75,000 Chinese students from mainland China in the United States. And people who are very active and very visible, take very visible roles in the exile movement is about 100, there are hundreds of them.
75,000 mainland Chinese students in this country.
Yeah.
How many of them have come since Tiananmen Square?
There are about 7,000 of them, but not all of them. Most of them were not activists in the movement because most activists are in jail now in China.
Can someone living in China who wants to come out now and go to school here, will the government allow them to leave?
Almost impossible. There are so many registrations, like you should pay a lot of fee, almost impossible fee for a Chinese family, like 10,000 Chinese dollars. And also you should have direct relatives overseas, which not a lot of Chinese do. So they put a lot of restrictions, makes it's impossible for a student to go abroad.
It says on the cover of this Shen Tong with Marianne Yan. Did Marianne Yan actually do the writing on the book?
Yeah, we wrote it together, and she did a lot of job, and she was a reporter for Washington Post for 5 years. And right now she's in Columbia University.
Is she Chinese?
School. She's a Chinese American.
Born here?
She was born in Taiwan and immigrant to the United States.
When did you start working on the book?
It's in January, in past January.
And what's the reason? What's the purpose? And what do you hope will happen with the selling of this book? Is it you going to make money with it?
Well, definitely there are money part. But that's what I said. I was really, the time I really feel I can write this so-called autobiography as a 21 years old student is I really want the whole world not only just remember Tiananmen Square, the dramatic scene, but also understand our desire for freedom and the faith of Chinese future and where the movement came from.
Are you going to try to get this book back into China?
Not the English version. I'm trying to also do the Chinese version and smuggle in China.
Is it possible to smuggle things back into China?
Oh yeah, definitely. That's part of our exile movement. We broadcast back to China, which can reach 80% population every morning, and also we smuggled our overseas Chinese language newspapers and magazines, express our as exile movement views and news about Eastern Europe and all the world event going on, and smuggled in China from south.
From what, down
South
around Hong
China.
Kong?
Yeah, Hong Kong and Macau, Thailand.
Now, you say you broadcast to 80% of the mainland China now?
We cover 60% of the land, but reach 80% population.
How?
We made the tapes in Chicago, our radio station, June 4th project, Voice of June 4th in Chicago, and we made the tape there and broadcast from Taiwan and several other places around China, in mainland China.
Do you hear back from people after you do that?
Oh yeah, they write to us all the time. We got tens of mails every week.
What do they say?
First of all, it's now the value about the uncensored news is one part. Definitely, it's valuable. More importantly, people feel the strong hope from the fact we are still have the voice in China as exile movement, and we're bringing hopes to Chinese. They really appreciate this, our work, and they encourage us to keep up the work.
When you were living in China and in high school and college, and the school you went to was
Peking University.
Peking University.
Yeah.
By the way, how'd you get in there?
Well, we had so-called college entrance examination, which is it's like the SAT in this country, but much harder, because it's very hard and you must pass that. It's almost the only standard for the student to get in school, especially very good school, leading university like Peking University. So people spend at least half a year or even a year, somebody do it over and over again for several times to take the test. And
do you have a choice of where you go to school? I mean, in other words,
you can have choice, but it's only depends on your grade on that and the so-called big test.
Can you then choose what you want to study?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, but when you choose your major, it's not like liberal arts education in this country. When you choose your major in the very beginning, before you enter the university, you should stick to it, basically. You can't study. I was a biology major. All my classes only biology, chemistry, and philosophy. You can't easily switch to philosophy, although I'm very interested in. And now here in Brandeis, I can study both philosophy and biology.
When you were in school, what kind of things, Americans like to think that they spent millions and millions of dollars to the Voice of America and things like that, influencing people inside China, to stand up and be for democracy. Did any of that get through?
Oh, definitely. The VOA, BBC, and Hong Kong newspapers and magazines have very big impact on Chinese people, because Chinese people view all these news sources as uncensored, the real free press. Meanwhile, generally the things Chinese press, and it is Chinese press, it's all government controlled, all should go along with so-called party lines by the documents sent by the party. Although they're also in the press, among the journalists, are also reformed for years already, and still, VOA and BBC and Hong Kong, Taiwan magazines and newspapers still bring real news and hopes along with our broadcasting station and newspapers to Chinese people. And I just hope VOA can keep up their good work and also make it more freer news. I know there are a lot of concern about the Chinese government, by the broadcasting station. I hope they can really have a free position on this issue.
Go back to what would you say was the beginning of Tiananmen Square? When did the activities that you first got involved in your opinion, lead to what eventually became the June 4th situation?
I think the 1989 movement was explosion of the whole more than 10 years contemporary Chinese pro-democracy struggle ever since the 1978 democracy war movement. At that time I was very young, I was 10 years old, I didn't involve, although the democracy war movement is just like 2 minutes walk from my house. And that's a milestone for the contemporary Chinese struggle for democracy, and it really set up the pace and gradually started to do this kind of self-education for the whole nation, for what democracy really means, what pluralism means, what the problem with the system. And almost every year after that, there was this elite and urban area movement gradually become bigger and bigger till 1989. Finally, it's become real nationwide, involved all the classes, not only elite, not only intellectuals or students, but also workers, journalists, and peasants even. The whole nation started in 1989.
I read in your book that and I may mispronounce it, Fang Lizhi
yeah.
spoke to a class or some kind of an event at your school, and he was then a member of the Communist Party?
He was the Communist Party, and he was vice president of a university, another major university in Middle China. It's called University of Science and Technology. And he was a vice president there, and he became for years the symbolic leaders of radical intellectuals, welcome, urging the Chinese government open the door more and more and welcome more Western ideas, Western format of democracy. So he becomes the hero and symbol in a lot of young students, Chinese students.
And is he still in Cambridge?
Yeah, he escaped to Cambridge.
Is he coming here?
He's coming, I believe, to Princeton next year.
Have you talked to him since he's been out?
Yeah, we contact him, and he's in the school and doing his research, and meanwhile keep informed of the exile movement, and he will, in his own way, involved in the human rights struggle for China.
But again, go back when you were in school. Was he one of your heroes when he came to speak to you? Did you follow him after that?
Oh, definitely. He has a big impact, and not only him, their whole school of, and I would say radical, liberal intellectuals, gradually grew up in this open door policy, older intellectuals, and they all have a very big impact on our generation, on the students on campus.
How much were you involved in the actual Tiananmen Square events as a leader, and what was your role?
You mean the 1989 movement?
Yes.
I was in charge of a group called the Olympic Institute, along with several other groups like campus student group like Democracy Salon, headed by another student leader, Wang Dan. We started, after Huayaobang's death, started the movement in Peking University and then in Beijing.
You called it Olympic Institute?
Yeah, that's the group I was head of before the movement started. And after the movement started, I was in charge of the news center. We have radio station, newspaper, as well as we hold a press conference for Western journalists. And then me and another student organized a dialogue delegation, one of the 3 student leading groups, which our task is to negotiate, maintain the ties with the government and negotiate, holding dialogues, represent the students until the end.
Another thing I remember is that Winston Lord, who was ambassador to China from the United States, spoke to one of your classes?
Not my class. The group I mentioned before, Democracy Salon, which is a group work closely with my Olympic Institute. They hold open discussions every Wednesday. It's also called Wednesday Forum. And Winston Lord, as well as Fang Lizhi, was there, spoke to the students.
And the government would allow that?
Well, at that time, it's always very tricky in a country with dictatorship like China. When the general atmosphere is kind of loose, you can do something as far as you don't cross, seems the invisible line. You don't cross that line, you can do something quite free. But if you cross that line, which frightened the government, they'll crack down, like what happened in June in 1989. But the lead period, there are a very long lead period before the movement emerged, which we hold open discussion on campus. We contact and discuss with social activists as well as radical intellectuals for a long time. And also we even precisely planned and prepared for the 1989 movement, although the outcome is kind of out of control.
There's a lot in this book that we're not going to be able to talk about, but one thing, it's a little bit off the subject here. I read this almost the last page of the main book. I had never hugged anyone in my family, and I didn't do it then. You write a lot about the lack of physical relationships between families, no hugging, hand-holding, and things like that. Where does that all come from?
Well, definitely the custom in China, the ways Chinese related to each other are quite different compared with Americans. So we really kind of hold back as more inside as a nationality as a whole. And but that's one thing also I think is changing in my generation. We discovered the freedom of individual. We discovered even the sexual freedom in a number of other ways.
Here's a picture of you and a girlfriend by the name of Andrea.
Yeah.
Is she still your girlfriend?
Yes, she is a Brazilian. She was my schoolmate in China, and now she's in Wellesley College.
So she's right up there near Boston.
Oh yeah.
And this is a picture of the two of you holding hands. Is that something that, how did you learn the personal affection compared to all the other people in your country?
Well, it's quite common in my generation. It's kind of a big surprise for my parenthood. As what I said, we really discovered not only in a deep philosophical way, the individualism, the seeking the hope inside ourselves, questioning the old culture, questioning the government. But meanwhile, we explored, a lot of new things, which kind of, new, very, very new for the older generation, includes the sexual freedom.
What do you think of our government?
I'm very disappointed, and the exile movement, Chinese exile movement, is very disappointed at the George Bush administrations on their policy on Sino-American relations. I think the Bush administration is choosing the wrong side of history in this issue by choosing the Beijing regime versus our exile movement, our pro-democracy movement. In other words, people's desire in China. And I think, when I came to this country, people told me, after 1949, there was a phrase in this country said, "We lost China," simply referring to the Communist Party drove away Kuomintang to Taiwan. But I think if the Bush administration keep doing what he's doing on the Sino-American relations, one day he will say, there will be another phrase, "We lose China again."
What do you say to those in China who might say, I'm glad that George Bush has kept the lines of communications open, because if he didn't have a most favored nations treaty and things like that, the door would be closed and we wouldn't have any dialogue?
No, I agree with that. That's my point of view also. The fine line, the fine balance is, first of all, we should keep the door open to China because its open door policy brought up all this. And the door must be open to China, although the hardliners in Beijing try to shut it down completely. But meanwhile, by remaining the relationship with China, trade relations, diplomatic, political, symbolic relations, the American government and other governments can do more than cut down totally the relationship. So by granting the MFN status, you can do differently than what George Bush administration has done by putting conditions. This country, I don't need to talk about all the techniques that Mr. Bush knows better than me. Your country has done so much to other countries, to other issues, like South Africa, like Soviet Union, so many other examples. By remaining the relations, you can really promote in the long run the people's desire for the democracy for China. Like, the condition can be release all the political prisoners, and there are thousands of them in jail. If they are released, it's a big factor. It will be a big factor and strong impact on the current underground movement in China.
You write a lot about seeing friends of yours or people that you were in the square with killed right in front of your eyes.
Yeah, during the massacre night, yes, I was on the Chang'an Avenue, the Eternal Peace Avenue, a mile west from the square, which was the most brutal killing field of the massacre night. And a lot of people talking about how many people died in the square. Actually, it's kind of misleading by the Chinese government, because there were not a lot of people died right in the square. The people who outside square, especially the west part of the city, were trying to prevent the soldiers, martial law soldiers, from rushing in the square and crack down on the student in the square. And it's there a lot of people were killed and gunned down by the martial law soldiers.
What's this picture on top right here?
That was the negotiation with the government. Me and another co-president of the dialogue delegation went to the government liaison officer, and after a closed-door meeting, all the journalists were surrounding us and asked what happened.
What's this picture right here?
That was May 4th demonstration. That was anniversary of a very important movement in 1919, May 4th movement. It's 70th anniversary of it, when me and Wang Dan, another student leader, lead the Peking University's demonstration, go in the square.
When you think back of the friends you made and all that, this is the giant, and I know
giant.
We'll get a picture here. Where is the giant, and who is he?
He is Chinese American. He was my schoolmate and a roommate when I was in Peking University, and recently he graduated from Peking University and now in Los Angeles.
So he came back to the States.
Yeah.
How about this fellow right here?
He was my high school classmate, and he's in Shanghai, still in university studying.
Was he involved at all in the Tiananmen Square activities?
No, because he was in Shanghai, a city in the middle China.
Where was this picture taken?
It's in Beijing when I described when I prepared the big test, the college entrance examination.
Written on the back wall is "Smile."
Yeah, because it was a very tense period for every student. It's like horror for everybody. So I just try to let me relax.
And what's this picture down here?
It's a happy period. It's after me and my best friend Da Kun entered our university, and we took the picture in Beijing.
What if you had the government that you would want? What would it look like?
Well, the final format of the democratic political structure, there are a lot of formats which we can do search on it for China, exactly what China should look like. But I think it's more important now, as a democracy, as a pro-democracy movement in China, the stage we're on now. I think it's more important to figure out what kind of ways were taken in order to get that final democracy. I think China should undergo the several approaches. It's a combination of Hungary, Poland, and Czechoslovakia's revolution for years, which I mean the internal reform and opposition political force, as well as general people's awareness for what democracy really means, people's recognition, of human rights, and people's political awareness.
You, during the Tiananmen Square activities, you spent a lot of time with reporters.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that you had a dialogue almost daily with a couple of Hong Kong reporters?
Mm-hmm. As well as Canadian, French, and American reporters. Because from the very beginning, I was in charge of the news center for the whole movement in Peking University. So we hold press conference, as well as the broadcasting station, the radio station is right in my dorm room, and also the newspapers, where the newspaper headquarters, the only independent newspaper run by students during the movement.
And you had a broadcast station that you broadcast to Tiananmen Square?
It's based in the Peking University, so it can basically reach the so-called university town in the one area in Beijing, which a lot of universities are there.
What impact, if any, did American television have on your movement? Did you see American television programs at all?
No, not really. We can't really see it. But for my case, I was the first news about the crackdown. It's pre-crackdown in the afternoon of June 3rd. I watched it through CNN in a very fancy joint venture hotel in Beijing. And I don't think a lot of people really watch what the Western media report on the movement during the movement, but they definitely know there are a lot of reporters, so they know the movement, the struggle they are holding on, are witnessed, are watched by the whole world. That's one very important difference the 1989 movement has compared with previous movement.
Reading your book, you see that you're always having disagreements among the students as to when to pull back and when to insist on dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
You think that if you'd have pulled out of the square before the 3rd and 4th, that you could have avoided the deaths and still made your point?
If we hold this theoretical discussion, I think we would. I mean, if we left the square earlier, probably we can avoid the massacre itself. But I think a country like China, with such a strong suppression, whenever they get in a mass movement, like the last spring, there's no way to so-called control, either by government or by so-called leaders of the movement, because it's just like a broken dike. So if somebody asks me, you know, what can I do differently if I can do it all over again? I think the only thing I can do differently is the timing, is the one to trigger the mass movement. So like what I mentioned before, I think China should undergo the 3 approaches for enough time, and then we should trigger the next mass movement like last spring. And the difference will be we can make it instead of pay a big price during the massacre night.
Who's got all the power in China right now?
Right now, the central government is very powerful. You know, in Beijing, they are trying to control everything. You know, like what they did for years after 1949. But meanwhile, the decentralizing political and economical trend is very strong. Local government, especially the coastal area, they're getting greater power. You know, in kind of semi-independently. And meanwhile, the faction is in the army is also very strong. And based upon people's dissatisfaction, the central government power is shaking. And more importantly, after the first fire in Tiananmen Square in Beijing, they totally lost their legitimacy among the Chinese people.
Is there anybody? I mean, is Deng Xiaoping still in power? Li Peng? Do these people matter anymore?
Oh, sure, they are very important now in the China's politics, and they are holding the power tightly by holding the army, at least trying to hold the army and the whole country and the whole press, you know, as much as possible. And it's very crucial. The hardliners like Deng Xiaoping or others, their death is very crucial for our progress, for our struggle, pro-democracy struggle. But on the other hand, a lot of people think only after they're dead we can keep going our movement, which is not true, because they see one hand, this very strong factor, I agree with it. But meanwhile, there are other factors, the local government factor, the free economies situation in China, factionism, army, all the things, meanwhile added to it, underground movement as well as very strong exile movement. All these factors play an important role in the China's right now the current political picture, and I think in a way a lot of people are thinking about if you deal with China, the only way is deal with Chinese. The Beijing government is correct if China was 20 years ago, but it's not correct now after this more than 10 years open door policy.
In 1997, Hong Kong reverts under the control of the Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
There's 6 million people sitting right on that southern border there,
mm-hmm.
With a lot of private enterprise and a lot of successful business activity. And right across the border in Guangdong, there's a lot of activity also. Is that southern attitude going to move up through the country?
Oh, definitely. I think it's understandable a lot of Hong Kong people worried of 1997. But collectively, when I see the China's picture as a whole, all the problem related to China, I think it's the Beijing government should be frightened by taking back the Hong Kong, because there is a real free society. It will have a great impact as what it has already provided for China for years, especially South China and intellectuals in the coastal area. And it's not only Hong Kong. The problem, the issues of Taiwan, Free Tibet movement and others like Macau, Mongolia, all the things, all these issues related to the mainland China politics will all have their own role, important role in the future China's political struggle.
Do you hope to go back someday and live in China?
Definitely, yeah, as soon as possible.
You don't like it here?
No, I like it a great deal, and I really learned not only from the school in the academic world, but also learned as a political activist a great deal from this country, what really democracy means, what democracy looks like as a, I will say, institutionalized democracy society. Democracy not only the ideal, the people's desire for society guarantee basic human rights, and it's not only in the government structure or free press or the social balance, but democracy become a sense of citizenship, people's individual involvement, in the society. So I really, I enjoy my life here, and I'm grateful to this great nation.
Here's what this book looks like: Almost a Revolution. Shen Tong is our guest, and we're talking about his activities in relationship with Tiananmen Square. It's actually a lot about your life from the early days. Seiji Ozawa, the conductor of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, you know that man.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you've listened to him play Beethoven, and how did that happen?
Well, that's part of the so-called open door policy. When it's the end of 70s, all this Western culture started. It was in China before the Cultural Revolution, and it's totally shut down during the 10 years disaster since 1966 to 1976. And there were 2 years kind of lead period before the real open door policy started in 1978. All the Western music, classic as well as pop music, not only Beethoven or Mozart or Tchaikovsky, but also Beatles, Simon Garfunkel, and even John Denver was there, and everybody knows their name, as well as Martin Luther King or Abraham Lincoln's name. Yeah.
Who taught you about Beethoven, Mozart, and Tchaikovsky?
Well, generally all these things were available in China, and I was studying violin with my violin teachers for a while. And although I was not a good violin player, my neighbor forced me to stop. And but meanwhile, it taught me to appreciate the classic music, and it's become a very important part of my life now.
Was your upbringing and your family, even though you say you lived in what, a room and a half or so as a family, more than 2 rooms, and how would you describe the conditions of how you lived compared to what we have here?
Well, it's really it's different. There are not a lot of very tall buildings, except the recent years they built a lot of fancy hotel and tall building. We live in just a house. It's a flat house without just 1 floor.
Connected with other houses?
Yeah, connected with other houses. We have a so-called yard, Chinese yard, which several families live in the same yard, and they each share several rooms. It's a traditional Chinese yard. We live in that, and a lot of yards are very good, and good quality house, but not my house.
And the original question was with your grandmother and your mother and father and the atmosphere they created. Is it much different than it was in a lot of other Chinese families? Or you said they were intellectuals. Would you have had a hard time learning some of the things you did if it wasn't for the fact that your parents were intellectuals?
Yeah, correct. There is different, my family compared with, it's basically an intellectual family.
Your mother and father in the middle here? See, in this
yeah, in the middle. Yeah, it's my father and mother, and it's my sister on the left. Yeah. How
did they become intellectuals?
My mother originally was a nurse, and she keeps studying and finally become a medical doctor. And my father and my sister, they all graduate from Peking University, which is a leading university academically and politically in China.
What do you want to eventually do with your life?
Well, now I consider myself as a political activist for promote the democracy for the future China. And I'm very committed to this cause, and I believe now I'll spend most of my life stick to this cause.
You think so?
Yeah.
And you said you started to study biology?
When I was in China for a while, when I was like every tower type student, I really believe science can save China, and I enjoyed a lot by studying biology and now philosophy. But I will study political science and international relations for my graduate study, hopefully starting next year. And now I'm deeply involved in the exile movement.
How do you afford to live?
Well, I'm living on a scholarship provided by the Brandeis University.
And then what happens after that? If you're going to be a political activist for your family and friends back in China, how are you going to be able to pay the bills once you get out of school?
No, I'm trying. Now I'm deeply involved in the movement. I'm trying to keep almost impossible. The campus life as well as exile activist life. I'm traveling around all over the world, trying to bring people's awareness, bring up dialogues between the Chinese community to the other, reaching out to other movement like civil rights movement, international labor movement, Eastern European pro-democracy movement, and hopefully, I hope I can get the scholarship for my graduate study again. And meanwhile, by promoting the movement, we also raise money to keep up our exile movement.
When you talk to Americans that don't know China and don't understand it, what do you tell them about the difference in life and the difference between the freedom that we have versus what you don't have back home?
Well, it's when I give a lot of talks and speeches to Americans to tell them what was going on there. One example I use, which I think is very direct to them, because all this kind of gathering, I can tell them, is not possible in China. And even if it's possible, you will always have quite a few uninvited people among you, listening to everything you say and taking mental notes. And you know for sure, even before you go there, your name, by present in this in the gathering, your name and even your family names will be on the government list. That's the reality in China. It's not imagination. This kind of suppression, this control. Americans, a lot of them take the freedom they have here for granted. The election just passed, a lot of the voter rate is very low. And they really don't know what freedom means. If you don't watch closely, you'll lose it again. And also in this regard, I also believe, like Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. You can't say you're free when 1.1 billion people in China are still struggling for basic human rights. And what they're struggling for is something you enjoyed so much here and even take it for granted.
What was the hardest thing about writing this book with Marianne Yan? What was hard about it?
It's not really hard in terms of our collaboration. The very hard part is the movement belongs to millions of people. It's hard for me to try to write in a kind of historian's view, and also, it's an ongoing struggle. I'm still in the story. I can't really have so-called accurate or not necessarily accurate, objective way to write it, although I tried very hard to write down, to record all the things happened minute by minute. But still, it's very hard to show the so-called umbrella picture as a historian. But meanwhile, by writing the Almost Revolution, it's really strengthened my commitment to the movement, because by reviewing in such a systematic way my life and my generation's life, it's really encouraged me to keep going on this road. And I felt, the strong strength inside myself, because I felt my generation, the young generation, are still with me, keep my dream alive.
In the back on page 339, you list a whole bunch of people and where they are today. One of the people that was, and we only have a couple minutes, that was prominent in the book was Ling.
Mm-hmm.
Where is she?
She, right now, when I wrote the book, she was in Paris, and right now she's in Princeton University.
So she's here now?
Yeah, she's in, yeah.
How come so many people went to Paris?
Well, because the French government provides the umbrella for Chinese exiles, and it was much easier than the United States.
Easier than coming here because the Chinese government would let you go?
No. When most of us escaped to Hong Kong. My case was different. I fled out of China and to Japan first, but the rest of us mainly escaped to Thailand, Macau, or mainly Hong Kong, and they were waiting there for other government to provide refuge, and it turned out French government, Canadian, and Australia, especially the French government, are the best.
So the Americans weren't as open as they should have been, in your opinion?
I hope they can do better. There are still a lot of activists escaped to Hong Kong, didn't settle down yet. Although American did sponsor some refugees here.
This is what the book looks like. It's called Almost a Revolution, and its author and principal character in the book is Shen Tong, one of those actively involved in the democracy movement in China. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. He passed away a month after I escaped from China, and he had a fatal disease, the blood cancer, but
leukemia.
Yeah, leukemia, and the partly the reason he died so fast. The disease was found like end of May, and he died like 2 months later. But he was too depressed in a lot of ways. Government put pressure on him, and he was a Communist Party member. All his life, he was trying to follow so-called party lines. You know, it's his whole life ideology. And the government asked him to be the spy of his own son, which also he trusts a lot. So it's this whole controversy in his life, you know, for a long time, especially during the 1989 movement. He was very depressed.
Your mother, how is she?
She's okay. She's still in Beijing and working in a very big factories, hospital, and she's a medical doctor.
She's a medical doctor?
Yeah. Your
sister?
My sister, as my father, same as my father and me, she graduated from Peking University. We're very proud of it, you know, of my family. And she was working in a government consulting company, but after my escape, government put pressures on her and took away her passport, and her work unit gave her a lot of hard time, and now she changed to a foreign company, worked for a foreign company in Beijing.
And your grandmother?
My grandmother, she's fine. She's 76 years old, and she brought me up, and she's still healthy, but the only thing is she really can see me in the near future, and I hope I can go back soon to see her.
Now this is a picture of your grandmother? The one on the top?
Yes, when I was very young. Like, that's the picture when I was 100 days, you know, after I was born.
You say early in the book that your grandmother at age 3 started to teach you important things. What kind of things did she teach you? Yeah, like
Chinese traditional literature, all the important works, like the three kingdoms, and the dreams about. It is several important traditional literature work.
One of the things you keep reading are references to world figures and some American figures that you seem to know about. And one of them was Rosa Parks.
Mm-hmm.
How did you know about Rosa Parks when you were growing up?
Not exactly Rosa Parks, excuse me. It's we know more about Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Dr. King, and Franklin, you know, and as well as the important figures during the Second World War. It's really due to the so-called open door policy in China. Since the end of 1970s, the Deng Xiaoping, after the fall of Mao Zedong's dynasty, basically, Deng Xiaoping's government opened door of China to the world. And Western materialism, as well as Western ideas and influential thinkers and politicians, all kind of rush in China, and my generation is a generation grew up in this totally new atmosphere, not only Western world stuff, but also Chinese intellectuals started to search their own view. At that time, there were scar literature, so-called new tide poetry, as well as pop music, which totally created new kind of culture, at least a pop culture. And we grew up, we started to think and grow up from this new atmosphere, the combination of a new Chinese liberal atmosphere combined with Western ideals and Western materialism. And we gradually have this new ideology, I would say it's individualism, totally different from the other generations in China previously. And I believe individualism, in a way, in a psychological and cultural way, is a foundation for pluralism eventually.
Now, if you were still in China, could you still read these books?
Right now, it's the control is very tight, but there's no way to just wipe out all the Western stuff, as well as, the Western ideals and a lot of new values have already combined with the native Chinese cultural development. So there's no way for the central government to wipe it out. So it's still possible, especially you're not in cities like Beijing or Shanghai, which control is very tight. If you're out of Beijing, it's quite free still.
Where did you learn your English?
In China and here, yeah. Every Chinese university student learn like 2 years so-called common English education. That's a part of the open door policy, which have a great deal of influence on us, and we take a big advantage from that.
You live near Tiananmen Square.
Yeah, it's like a mile west from Tiananmen Square. The street my family's house on the side of is called Eternal Peace Avenue, Chang'an Avenue, and Tiananmen Square is kind of in the middle of the Chang'an Avenue.
Explain the kind of living conditions that you had when you were growing up.
Well, it was really different from so-called American life. It's very crowded. It's in Beijing, a lot of families, 3 generations live in one room, and the materials it's lack of materials for people line up a long line to buy basic supplies, but it's different. It's very compared, the level of living is much poorer than American life, but most of the time people are happy because it's this 10 years open door policy. People really feel the sense of
what are you going to do when you graduate? And you are a senior?
I'm a senior, yeah. I'm applying graduate schools, started to move my academic interest to political science and international relations.
Can you go back to China?
Right now, I don't think so, no.
So do you plan to stay in the United States?
Yeah, I'm consider myself as exile. That's me. I can't go back right now, but I will go back whenever it's possible.
Why did you decide to write a book?
Well, it's very complicated. When I escaped from China, I was traveling around all over the world to tell the people what's going on there, And that's the time I find out it seems there are 2 Tiananmen Squares. One is the one I really experienced. There are excitement, frustration, even infightings, which never leave the heart of a social revolution. Another is the one, kind of created by the Western media. Each piece of the second Tiananmen Square is all accurate, but as a whole, it's quite dramatic and isolated, kind of stick out from Chinese history. People know Tiananmen Square, God of democracy, student in front of tanks, but they don't know exactly where the movement came from. So they don't really know where it goes. So it seems for them, China didn't make it, they were close, and the Eastern European made it. So that's the time I feel the urgency to write a book as an insider, not only of the 1989 movement, but as a young person grow up in China for such a distinguished decade, the so-called open door policy ever since the end of 1970s. How my generation grew up and how this new generation with a totally new ideology shaped the new atmosphere in the society, and finally shaped and triggered the 1989 movement.
During the book, we get to know your mother and father and sister and grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Your father died recently.
Mm-hmm.
When did he die, and what was it of? Chen Tong, author of Almost a Revolution, in the epilogue of your book, you write, "I believe the end of tyranny is near." How near?
Well, I think for me, for a lot of people, they think the movement in China is over. But by my definition, when we're talking about the pro-democracy movement in China, I see more fundamental. I see in a more fundamental way. I mean, the foundation for the last spring movement, the people's dissatisfaction, the decentralizing political and economic trend by the local government, central government reformers versus conservatives, and also, the factions in the army, radical intellectuals searching for the new possibility for China. All these factors, they were foundation for the last spring movement, and they were only deepened and strengthened by the massacre itself. So I think the potential is still there, and even stronger. And after last spring movement, we have our underground movement as well as exile movement. So I think the movement still keep going, although we have a surface setback, and we paid a big price last spring.
Here's the cover of your book. Who is this?
The two students actually were standing on a bus during a demonstration. One of them was my friend.
What's his name?
I don't want to give his name, but he's in Tsinghua University, one of the Beijing biggest university.
So he's still in China?
Yeah.
When did you leave China?
Last June, like a week after the massacre.
And where are you now?
I'm in Brandeis University in Boston area.
Studying what?
Studying biology and philosophy, and also my group Democracy of China Fund, also based in Boston.
Group?
My exile pro-democracy movement organization. It's called Democracy of China, based in Boston.
And